speaker will be Mr. Jeff Tweedy. Jeffrey Tweedy is president and CEO of Sean John, the award-winning clothing and lifestyle brand founded by Sean Diddy Combs. Along with Mr. Combs, Jeff is a founder and has been with the brand since its inception. Jeff began his career as a stock boy at Birch's of Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and after a short time realized fashion was his calling. A chance meeting with Jeffrey Banks and Ralph Lauren placed Jeff on the fast track to a career in fashion. Today, he is one of the most recognized and highly regarded leaders in the fashion industry, and is celebrated for his sharp insights, strong creative vision, and an acute ability to predict shifting trends. Jeff lives in New Jersey with his family. A proud father of 2 sons, Jeff calls his kids his inspiration and reason for being, and always keeps them in mind when crafting his legacy. So please give a warm round of applause for Mr. Jeff Tweedy.
I'm Jeffrey Tweedy, President and CEO of Sean John. How many of you guys are familiar with Sean John? Oh, Daddy. So hopefully today I'll leave you with some ideas how I started, some of the things I've gone through, and hopefully I'll leave you with some encouragements and some things to follow your life by to give you a little direction. The reason this slide is here is very interesting. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My house was 7 people in a 2-bedroom home. I didn't understand what and why when you hit the light switch at night in the kitchen, there were a lot of roaches. I thought that was the way people lived. I thought that was normal. It inspired me to know that this wasn't the life I wanted. And it inspired me to realize that there's something better. But I didn't know what that was. I thought this was the norm. I had a chance to understand that my education wasn't the best education. I was a C+ student. And the reason I got the plus because the teacher loved the way I dressed, little that I have. I wish he had focused more time on my education than the way I dressed. But I got by, and I truly got by. But I understood that by not having a great education, there had to be something else to trigger my career and get where I needed to go. So I had to find my hustle. And you guys hear this lightly all the time about finding your hustle. But it's not necessarily your hustle, but what is it that's going to drive you to get to the next step? And it might not always be education. I gave a keynote speak at Harvard Business one time, and I asked everyone to look to the left and the right. Everyone there was from Harvard. So the person to the left was from Harvard, the person to the right was from Harvard. But the difference was that who has the best hustle? The kid to the left, father might be the president of Merrill Lynch. The kid to the right might be just a great kid, good education. He's got to have the best hustle though. What I realized also is that one time I was on a bus from my high school to my neighborhood, and I fell asleep on the bus. This is a true story. I woke up in Georgetown. If you guys don't know anything about Georgetown, it's very similar to waking up on 57th and Madison Avenue coming from this, if you could imagine. And I didn't know where I was. I was extremely nervous about where I was and how do I get back and what am I doing up here? And how upset will my mother be at the age of 16 that I'm up in Georgetown? But what I realized the next day, I got back on the bus and walked around, embraced it, understood that I was out of my comfort zone, but how do I make the best of being out of your comfort zone? And in this store, ice cream parlor was a sign that said, "Help Wanted." I was 16 years old, 15, 16 years old, and I knew at the time you had to be 16 to get that job. I walked right in, nervous. First thing I did was lie and said I was 16 years old because I wanted that job. And I realized that you have to take advantage of those moments and not always lying. I'm not saying lying about things, but that was the moment for me to seek my opportunity. I had a chance to really embrace Georgetown and get to know the people that were coming into the stores. And one of the things you should always do is always engage with your community. Always engage. I always meet young people that never want to speak up. Always speak up. Introduce yourself. That's very important. So I started asking the gentlemen that were coming in every day that worked at the clothing store next door that they need a stock boy. One day, one came in and said, hey, we need a stock for you. Would you like to apply for it? I did. That was a quick turn for me, which was great. And I realized that that was my moment of creating relationships. As small as that was, from me scooping ice cream, to meeting a gentleman who worked at a clothing store, to me now being a stock boy in this store that was really exciting for me. It was like our small Barneys of New York, if you can imagine. About 6 months later, I lost that job. And the reason I lost that job was because I was feeling myself at 16. I was a little cocky. We all get that feeling sometime, right? But as we know, that setbacks is always a setup for comebacks. 2 weeks later, I applied for another opportunity at Neiman Marcus further up. Within a year, I was the youngest assistant manager in the men's department responsible for a $20 million business. Coming down the escalator was Mr. Ralph Lauren with an entourage of 12 people. It's the first time I realized what an entourage was. And I took the time before I got that job to understand everything about the fashion industry from a distance. That means I was reading everything. I was looking at all the trade publications, all the magazines, understanding what stores had what. I traveled to any store I could get to go to within the neighborhood to understand what Ralph Lauren was, what Versace was, what Giorgio Armani was. So I embraced the industry. And I tell you, do not wait for an institution to teach you your craft. Learn it on your own. And I did that. I learned this craft on my own. Coming down the escalator was Mr. Ralph Lauren. I simply walked over to him, very nervous as an African-American man, and introduced myself. Mr. Lauren, I'm Jeffrey Tweedy. I'm the assistant manager of the men's department. May I show you around? Now, one of the things that I like to emphasize here is aggressive and a knowledgeable approach. I meet a lot of people who approach me, but they're not knowledgeable why they're approaching me. First thing they say is, can I get a job? And I go, well, what do you want to do? And a lot of them say, I don't know, I just want a job. Well, that's the person I'm not going to hire, because they don't know what they want to do. And I'm not interested in figuring out what they want to do. And there's some people who approach you aggressively that is on the right track and understand it. But don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to introduce yourself to people. And that's what I did with Mr. Ralph Lauren. Now, he asked me, what did I want to do? I said, I would love to be in the fashion industry. He said, well, if you want to be in the fashion industry, you need to be in New York City. Okay. How do I get to New York City? It sounds wonderful. It sounds like a great dream. He gave me his card. For 6 months, I didn't call. But what I did, I continued to study. And I would read in the magazine, Mr. Ralph Lauren opens a store in London. Mr. Lauren, congratulations on the new store. Mr. Ralph Lauren celebrates an award. Mr. Ralph Lauren, congratulations on that new award. So I did this for about 6 to 7 months to prepare myself for that phone call. I didn't realize that I was really preparing myself, and I didn't realize that what I was doing was opening the door for my call. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I was maximizing the moment. I didn't realize who gets those calls, cards, and phone calls, and those notes. The assistants, right? So when I got on the phone to call the first time, I thought they were going to take a message as this next, get rid of him next. I said, it's Jeffrey Tweedy, might I speak to Mr. Lauren? Sure, hold on. Next one, the executive office, may I help you? Hi, it's Jeffrey Tweedy, may I speak to Mr. Lauren? Now at this point, I'm sweating bullets. I'm like, no, they're supposed to take a message. You're not supposed to keep putting me through. So finally, Mr. Lauren's personal assistant gets on the phone. She goes, Jeffrey, how are you? I said, how am I? Why are you asking how am I?